Look around the room you're sitting in right now. Your phone, your clothes, your furniture, that coffee mug, the chair you're sitting on. Almost everything you can see spent weeks floating across the ocean inside a shipping container. A simple, boring, corrugated steel box. And that shipping container changed the world more than the internet ever did. Sounds crazy, right? But here's the thing. Before this box existed, shipping stuff across the ocean was an absolute nightmare, and nobody ever talks about it. So let's go back, way back, to a time when moving things from one country to another was so expensive, so slow, and so messy that most of the stuff you buy today simply could not exist. Before the 1950s, if you wanted to send something across the ocean, here's what happened. Workers called longshoremen would carry your stuff onto a ship, by hand, one box at a time, one barrel at a time, one sack at a time. This was called break bulk cargo, loose goods loaded piece by piece. These guys were hauling 30 to 50 kilograms on their shoulders, sometimes 80 kilograms. Imagine carrying a grown adult on your back, walking up a ramp into a dark ship, stacking that load perfectly, then walking back down and doing it again, and again. For days. A single ship needed 8 to 10 days just to get loaded. Think about that. The ship might only take 10 days to cross the entire Atlantic Ocean, but it would sit in port for just as long, waiting for people to stack stuff inside it by hand, sometimes even longer. And the cost was insane. Between 60 and 75% of the total cost of shipping something was just the dock labor. Not the fuel, not the ship, just the guys loading and unloading. Shipping costs added 15 to 25% to the price of everything. So if a factory in one country made something really good and really cheap, it didn't matter. By the time you shipped it, the price went through the roof. And then there was the stealing. Oh man, the stealing. The docks were basically an open buffet. There was a joke at the New York piers that a worker's real pay was $20 a day and all the scotch you could carry home. If you tried to ship something small and valuable like watches or whiskey, good luck. A big chunk of it would vanish before it reached the other side. Organized crime ran the docks. It was so bad they made a movie about it. On the Waterfront, 1954. That wasn't fiction. That was basically a documentary. So shipping was slow, expensive, and half your stuff got stolen. Great system, right? That's the world before containerization. Now enter a trucker from North Carolina named Malcom McLean. Not a scientist, not an engineer, a truck driver. In 1935, McLean and his brother and sister started a tiny trucking company with one used truck. They hauled dirt and empty tobacco barrels. By 1954, McLean Trucking was the third most profitable trucking company in America with almost 1,800 trucks. The man knew how to move things. But here's the moment that changed everything. 1937. McLean is sitting at a dock in New Jersey, waiting. His truck is full of cotton bales that need to go on a ship, and he's watching longshoremen unload his truck. Piece by piece, bale by bale, lifting each one by hand and walking it onto the ship. He waited an entire day. And sitting there, getting more and more frustrated, he had the simplest idea in the world. What if you could just lift the whole truck trailer and put it on the ship? Don't touch the stuff inside. Don't unpack anything. Just pick up the whole box and go. It took him almost 20 years to make it happen. He sold his entire trucking company because the government wouldn't let him own both trucks and ships. He bought 2 old World War II oil tankers. He hired an engineer named Keith Tantlinger to design the box and the system to stack them. And on April 26, 1956, the first container ship sailed. The ship was called the SS Ideal X. It left Newark, New Jersey, carrying 58 metal containers, each one 35 feet long. Loading those 58 containers took less than 8 hours. When the ship showed up in Houston 5 days later, 58 trucks were already waiting to pick them up. And here's the number that matters. Loading cargo the old way cost $5.86 per ton. Loading it in containers cost 16 cents per ton. That's a 97% cost reduction. Overnight. Now you'd think everyone would be thrilled. Nope. The dock workers wanted to sink the ship. Literally. A union boss named Freddie Fields watched the Ideal X leave and said, "I'd like to sink that son of a bitch." And you can understand why. This box was going to destroy their jobs, and it did. In 1950, about 100,000 full-time dock workers worked at American ports. By 2003, that number was 10,500. 90% of those jobs were gone. In New York specifically, close to 90% of dock workers lost their jobs within about 15 years. But the problems didn't stop with angry workers. Nobody could agree on how big the box should be. McLean's company used 35-foot containers. Another company used 24-foot containers because Hawaiian pineapples were too heavy in bigger ones. Someone else used 27-foot containers. Another company used 17-foot containers because they needed to fit on narrow mountain roads in South America. It was chaos, dozens of different sizes, none of them compatible. It took years of arguing. Engineers, shipping companies, truckers, railroad people, Europeans, Americans, everyone fighting over inches and feet. But finally, in January 1968, the International Organization for Standardization published the answer, ISO 668. The container would be 8 feet wide, and the standard lengths would be 20 feet and 40 feet. The 20-foot container became the TEU, the 20-foot equivalent unit, and that's still how we measure everything in shipping today. And here's the move that made it all work. McLean gave away his patents for free. He told the ISO, anyone can use my design, no charge. If he had charged royalties, every shipping company would have designed their own box and the whole system would have fractured. By giving it away, he made sure everyone used the same box. That one decision is probably the reason globalization happened the way it did. Now let's talk about how insanely big this system got. The largest container ships today are almost impossible to wrap your head around. The MSC Arena holds over 24,000 containers. It's 400 meters long. That's roughly the length of 4 football fields end to end. It stacks containers 26 tiers high, and the crew running this floating city of steel boxes. As few as 13 people. 13 people driving a ship carrying over $1 billion worth of stuff. The ship-to-shore cranes that load these ships move about 26 containers per hour on average. But in Qingdao, China, they've got automated cranes that hit 61 moves per hour. Their system went from needing 60 workers to unload a ship down to 9. Shanghai has a fully automated terminal with 28 robot cranes, 121 automated stacking cranes, and 145 driverless vehicles. Humans barely touch the containers. Maersk, the world's largest shipping company, operates over 700 vessels. They actually acquired McLean's original company, Sealand Service, in 1999. Today, major shipping lines like Maersk, Costco, and China Shipping move goods along the busiest trade route in the world, the Trans-Pacific Shipping Lane. And here's the scale of the whole thing. About 65 million shipping containers exist in the world right now. Roughly 250 million container trips happen every year. The goods inside them are worth about $14 trillion. That's roughly equal to the entire GDP of China. The port of Shanghai alone handled 51.5 million containers in 2024. That was the first time any port ever crossed 50 million. The port of Rotterdam, Europe's largest container hub, handles about 15 million containers annually. Now, you might be thinking, okay, shipping got cheaper. So what? Here's so what. Before the container, where you made stuff depended on where your customers were. You built your factory near the people buying your products because shipping was too expensive to do it any other way. After the container, that math completely flipped. Now you could build your factory wherever labor was cheapest and ship the finished product anywhere in the world for almost nothing. That one change created the modern global economy. Researchers studied 157 countries and found that containerization increased trade between industrialized nations by 790% over 20 years. For comparison, signing a trade agreement between two countries only increased trade by 45%. The container did almost 18 times more for global trade than actual trade agreements. Shipping a television from Asia to America costs less than $5. Shipping a pair of sneakers across the Pacific costs somewhere between 30 cents and 75 cents. One economist said it's more accurate to assume that moving goods is essentially free than to assume it matters at all. Before the container, that would have been a crazy thing to say. Now it's basically true. This transformation is thoroughly documented in Mark Levinson's definitive book, The Box, which chronicles how containerization reshaped the global economy. This is how China went from making 2% of the world's manufactured goods in the early 1980s to over 30% by 2022. Before 1980, Shenzhen's economy was a rounding error compared to Hong Kong. By 2018, Shenzhen's GDP had overtaken Hong Kong's. That doesn't happen without the container. The system even enabled innovations like double-stack rail transport, where containers are stacked too high on trains, creating seamless intermodal freight transport from ship to rail to truck. So if the container is so great, what's the problem? The problem is that this entire beautiful system is incredibly fragile, and we got a perfect demonstration in March 2021. The Ever Given, a container ship almost as long as the Empire State Building is tall, was passing through the Suez Canal. A sandstorm hit, the ship turned sideways, and for 6 days it was stuck, completely blocking one of the most important shipping routes on Earth. 12% of all world maritime trade just stopped. The estimated cost was $9.6 billion per day. Over 430 ships piled up at the entrances, waiting. Some ships gave up and went around Africa instead, adding 7 to 10 extra days to their journey. It took 14 tugboats and the removal of 27,000 cubic meters of sand to finally get the ship free. And the Suez Canal is just one of several choke points that the entire global shipping system depends on. The Strait of Malacca, between Malaysia and Indonesia, carries almost a quarter of all international maritime trade. Its narrowest point is less than 3 kilometers wide. The Panama Canal had to cut daily ship transits almost in half in 2023 because of a drought. Each ship that goes through uses 52 million gallons of fresh water. And then there are the Houthi attacks. Starting in late 2023, Houthi forces in Yemen began attacking ships in the Red Sea. They hit over 178 vessels in 2024, sank 4 ships, and killed 9 sailors. Container traffic through the Suez Canal dropped by 90%. Shipping rates between Shanghai and Rotterdam jumped 7 times higher. Companies rerouted around Africa, adding weeks to every journey. The system that delivers your stuff with magical efficiency is held together by a handful of narrow waterways, and when any one of them breaks, the whole world feels it. One last thing. In January 1992, a container ship called the Ever Laurel hit a storm in the North Pacific. 12 containers went overboard. One of them contained 28,800 plastic bath toys, yellow ducks, red beavers, blue turtles, and green frogs. They washed up in Alaska 10 months later, then Hawaii, then Japan. They drifted through the Bering Strait, got frozen in Arctic ice, floated past where the Titanic sank, and finally reached the United Kingdom and Ireland in 2007. 15 years and 17,000 miles later. Oceanographer Curtis Ebbesmeyer tracked those rubber ducks for years. They proved that it takes about 3 years for ocean currents to complete a full gyre circuit around the North Pacific, a scientific discovery made possible by accident because a container full of bath toys fell off a ship. About 2,000 of those rubber ducks might still be out there right now, floating somewhere in the ocean, inside the same current system that carries $14 trillion worth of goods every year. That's the shipping container, a boring metal box that costs a few $1,000s, lasts about 15 years, and somehow became the most important invention most people have never thought about. It slashed shipping costs by 97%. It made globalization physically possible. It destroyed 100,000 jobs and created tens of millions more. It turned China into the world's factory. It put cheap goods in every store you've ever walked into. And it's so invisible, so taken for granted, that you probably never once wondered how that banana on your counter got there. Well, now you know. It came in a box.